Thank you for joining us for another edition of Coffee with the Consulate. I'm so pleased for the opportunity to continue our diplomatic work, this time online, to share with our audience some meaningful discussions on leadership and international affairs. I would like to thank the Jewish Herald Voice for serving as our media partner for this program, and I'd like to welcome our moderator, Aaron Howard, staff writer at the Jewish Herald Voice. It is my honor and privilege to welcome my friend, Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz is a tireless fighter for liberty and has led a life dedicated to public service, serving as Solicitor General of the state of Texas and a private litigator before being elected to the United States Senate in 2012. Senator Cruz sits on the critical Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, chairs the subcommittee on Constitution in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and had been a profound and outspoken advocate on the United States-Israel alliance. I had the opportunity to meet and work with Senator throughout my tenure, and I can say firsthand that Israel sees Senator Cruz as one of its most dedicated, friendly, and close leaders in the United States. The floor is yours, Howard.
As we always do, let's start with some rapid-fire questions for both the Senator and the Consulate General. Rapid-fire, Senator Cruz, we know how you take your coffee. What's your go-to pickup, the one thing you do in the morning routine that gets you energized or motivated for the rest of the day?
Well, I always start with a cup of coffee, lots of cream. This morning I started with playing about 2 hours of basketball and tennis, and so I'm limping through the rest of the day from banging against my body guy who's about 24 years old and played football at Arkansas.
Consul General?
Well, I started my day with a 6-mile jog, and I can still take it. I'm not limping, but I feel every single bone in my body.
Senator Cruz, what is the one word that best describes your leadership style?
Fighter.
Consul General?
Belief in people, belief in institutions, belief in myself, family.
Senator Cruz, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
In life, many things, but let me interpret that and focus on politics. The best political advice I've ever gotten was from my wife, Heidi, years ago. When I was getting ready to give a speech and I was about to walk out on stage, and she said, remember, it's not about you. It's about them. It's about their family, their kids, their dreams, their hopes. And I think that's a really good admonition for all of us to remind ourselves of on a regular basis.
Thank you. Consul General, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
It was from my dad. He always used to tell me, you can be serious with a lot of humor. Don't take yourself too much, too seriously, but be serious when you do whatever you do.
I have a question now that the holidays are approaching for both of you. This year has been a difficult one for a lot of people. And it seems the holiday season and spending time with loved ones has never been more significant. As you prepare to celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah respectively, what are your most cherished traditions of the season? Senator Cruz?
You know, my favorite is just time with family. We just finished Thanksgiving and we had our immediate family gathered together along with my parents. And, my family's Cuban American. And so every holiday we play dominoes. Our dominoes games are vicious. They involve a lot of taunting and pretty aggressive. My dad and I this time took on just about all comers and we had a pretty good run of it. So I just like being with family and laughing and cutting up.
Senator Cruz, fast question. Artificial or natural Christmas tree?
Natural. We just bought it a week ago.
Consul General, what about you? What is your most cherished tradition of the Hanukkah season?
Well, it's lighting candles of Hanukkah, the whole family, and from myself until to my youngest daughter, all of us lighting the candles and then singing songs. This is something that we all wait year-round.
I have a couple of questions about personal leadership. Senator Cruz, you've dedicated your life to public service. You are a constitutional scholar, an esteemed litigator, and outstanding in the Senate. What drove your desire to serve in the... And what words of advice would you share with someone who is interested in going into public service?
Well, I would say a lot of my passion for politics comes from my family story. Like all of us, we stand on the shoulder of our parents, grandparents. My dad was born in Cuba, grew up in Cuba, and he fought in the Cuban Revolution. And he was imprisoned, he was tortured in Cuba as a teenager. And he fled Cuba and came to America, came to Texas in 1957. He couldn't speak English. He had $100 sewn into his underwear, and he got a job washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour. And he made his life in America. America represented freedom. It literally saved his life. And when I was a little kid, I used to listen to my father and also my aunt, my tia Sonia, who fought in the revolution several years later on the other side, as it so happened. And she too was imprisoned and tortured. And I would listen to my dad, I'd listen to my aunt, and they described being freedom fighters. And it inspired me from when I was a little kid. What I wanted to do at 3, 4, 5 years old was fight to defend freedom, because my dad used to say to me all the time, when we lost our freedom in Cuba, we had a place to flee to. If we lose it here, where do we go?
Senator Cruz, I believe the Consul General has a quick question for you as well.
Senator Cruz, this is always, I ask this when I meet politicians, and I'm very curious, what are your future political plans?
Well, I don't know. My future political plans are to keep fighting for 29 million Texans, keep fighting for the free enterprise system we have in America, keep fighting for the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and keep fighting to defend America and to stand with our friends and allies, most especially the state of Israel. 8 years ago, when I was elected to the Senate, I resolved to be the strongest defender of Israel in the Senate. And I've worked hard to follow through on that promise. And I intend to continue doing all of that. We'll see what that entails, whether that's in the Senate or in a different role. Obviously, I ran for president 4 years ago. I got to tell you, that's the most fun I've ever had in my life. It was an incredible journey, and we'll see what the future holds.
So maybe I'll also run for presidency.
Fantastic. I look forward to working together.
No. I'm just joking.
Consul General, in the years you have spent in Houston in the diplomatic service, what has made the greatest impression upon you as far as building cooperation? And what advice would you share for those interested in going into the foreign service?
Well, when I arrived here, this was the first time I arrived to the Southwest, to Texas. And I remember, I'll never forget, I had a visit in Lockheed Martin, Fort Worth, with the F-35. And when I ended my tour over there, I understood what it means to be a superpower. What it means that the United States is a superpower that one can just not comprehend. And I was also very, very happy to know that Israel and America are allies. And my duty is to try and strengthen, widen the connections, not only with the United States, but with the Southwest and specifically with Texas. And please God, at the end of 2021, less than a year from now, almost a year from now, there will be a direct flight with American Airlines from Dallas to Tel Aviv. And I hope that will bring many tourists from Israel to Texas and from Texas straight to Israel, and it will be a different different game altogether, because Israelis and Texans share the same, not only values, but they think alike and they act alike, and I think it was more than natural to have such a direct flight, and I'm looking forward to see how things will turn out.
Senator Cruz, next month, a new session of the United States Congress will convene. Now, this comes after a series of historic developments in the U.S.-Israeli relationship. You've been a prolific supporter and advocate for the U.S.-Israel alliance, authoring and sponsoring legislation that furthers cooperation. A question for you. What drives your support of Israel in Congress, and what are your foreign relations priorities for the next session?
Well, my support of Israel is fundamentally because Israel and America share values. We are both liberal democracies that value human rights, that stand together as friends, and supporting Israel is overwhelmingly in America's national security interest. One of the things that I encourage those of us in the pro-Israel community to do is to articulate and explain support for Israel in terms of how it benefits America. The enemies of Israel are the enemies of America, and the enemies of America are the enemies of Israel. And we stand together. Our cooperation is immensely valuable. You know, it was interesting. Gilad was talking a minute ago about the similarities between Texas and Israel, and I agree with that. And you know, one of the early drivers for me, and this is actually a story I've shared with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's become a good and close friend, is a leader I deeply admire. But the story that I've shared with Bibi is I was a kid when the Entebbe raid happened. And that made a powerful impact to me, because what I interpreted the Entebbe raid as saying to the world is, if you take an Israeli citizen hostage, that Israeli citizen may lose his or her life, but you're going to die. And that was, as a 5-year-old kid, that was a powerfully Texan approach to foreign policy and national security. And I remember cheering for Israel then and admiring the absolute seriousness with which, for the entire course of the existence of the state of Israel, you have been surrounded by enemies who would drive you into the sea if you showed weakness. And that gives a clarity. There's no bullshit for leaders of Israel, because the stakes are too high. And that's something I admire very directly, but I agree with Gilad, that also makes it, it is very consistent with the great state of Texas.
Consul General, after that answer, what areas of the relationship would you like to see expanded?
Well, with the United States, I think I'd prefer speaking about the Southwest, where I here am the Consul General, because with the United States, I mean, everyone understands it's security, it's economy, it's democracy, but I'd like to focus on the Southwest, and there is not such a large Jewish community here in the Southwest. The Jewish community is a bridge between Israel and America, and I think the Jewish community can involve or can strengthen the ties between the personal ties. I always say I call it P2P, people to people. Have personal ties, and as I said, touring. I don't know if people know, but out of the around almost 1 million Israelis that visit the United States every year, forget about the COVID year, but every year around 1 million Israelis visit the United States, less than 5% of them visit the Southwest. Less than 5%. And I would like much more than 5%. I'm talking about, my goal is 50%, but if I get to 25% of them coming to the Southwest, that would be, in my eyes, a success, because the minute they'll see it, you'll see more companies here, you'll see more med tech here, you'll see everything, and vice versa, from Texas to Israel. This is my goal. This is where I'm aiming. And people and leaders like Senator Cruz help us a lot. And I am sure we will make it happen. It will take me a little more time, a year, 2, 10 years from now. But at the end of the day, it will happen.
One of the bright spots that we've seen this year, the starting of commercial flights now underway between Israel and Dubai, a memorandum of understanding on tourism being signed between Bahrain and Israel, a historic trilateral summit between Israel, the United States, and the United Arab Emirates. It was hosted by Israel. Gentlemen, in your view, are we entering into a new era of peace in the Middle East? And what would you identify as ways to make that peace lasting? Senator Cruz, we'll start with you.
Well, I certainly hope so. And by any measure, the last several months have been historic. The Abraham Accords have been enormously consequential. And I think they were really the fruition of a very significant change in foreign policy. For 8 years in the Obama-Biden administration, the approach was that resolving the Palestinian situation was the paramount issue. And unfortunately, the Obama-Biden administration was willing to express far too much antagonism and hostility to the government of Israel to try to pressure that change. That manifested most completely in the UN Security Council's adoption of Resolution 2334, a blatantly false declaration that much of modern day Israel is illegally occupied territory, including much of Jerusalem, including the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, including the Wailing Wall. That is all predicated on a mountain of lies. But that was the prevailing foreign policy wisdom in Washington. When the Trump administration came in, I played a very active role with the president in changing our approach. And I think there were two early foreign policy battles that were incredibly consequential and set the stage for the Abraham Accords. The first was moving our embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. That was a major argument within the Trump administration. Both the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense vehemently opposed it. They argued to the president that doing so would enrage the enemies of Israel. I made the case repeatedly to the president and directly that we should move the embassy to Jerusalem, that it would be heard unequivocally by our friends and by our enemies, that as a clear and unambiguous declaration that America stands with Israel. The president agreed with me. He overruled his own State Department, his own Defense Department. I was there in Jerusalem the day the embassy was opened. It was a time of celebration. I've been to Jerusalem many times. I've never seen the dancing in the streets that there was at that time. And I don't believe it is a coincidence that within that very same week that we opened our new embassy, the United States withdrew from the Obama-Iran nuclear deal. I think that was the most catastrophic foreign policy blunder the United States has made in modern times. And I think pulling out of the Iran deal was the most important national security decision the Trump administration has made. That there was the exact same division, the exact same battle lines were there in the Trump administration. Both state and defense argued for staying in the Iran deal. Once again, I made that case directly to the president repeatedly that we should pull out of the deal. The president agreed, overruled state and defense, pulled out of that deal. And I believe that clarity directly led to the Abraham Accords. I spoke with the leadership of the UAE and Bahrain. Both said they wanted to be friends with America. They wanted to stand with America. And what was clear is that one of the ways to stand with America is to be friends with Israel, that being friends with Israel, they recognized would further their relationship with America. That's the advantage of the clarity. And if we do end up next month, I hope this is not the case, but if we end up with a Joe Biden presidency, I very much hope we don't see a shift back to the misguided policies of the Obama-Biden administration. If they try to go there, I will lead the fight against it. If they try to resurrect the Iran nuclear deal and once again send billions to the Ayatollah Khamenei, who leads chants of death to America and death to Israel, I'll lead the fight to stop it, because that is misguided. It is foolhardy. It doesn't work. It is proven to fail. And it is really, really dangerous.
Consul General, what about you? Do you think we're in a new era, on the edge of a new era of peace in the Middle East?
I think so. I think that the most important issue that we saw with the Abraham Accords was the recognition, the understanding and the recognition of Israel as a fact that we will stay in the Middle East and we are an asset, and that we can, and that all the Arab moderate Sunni countries can work with us. We would like to work with them. We know that the Emirates, Bahrain, and Sudan have already decided. So we know that there are more countries that are looking into it very, very seriously. And I think that in the coming years, we'll see more and more Arab Muslim countries recognizing Israel, working with Israel, understanding that Israel is the solution and not a problem. And when that will be the case, we will look back on these years and we'll say that these years, this year, the 2020, when the Abraham Accords were signed, that was the beginning of the big change in the Middle East. And this is historical. Because for now, when we're very close to the events, we maybe don't understand how historical this is. In time, we will see it historical, and I believe that Israel will become part and parcel of the Middle East, and we will be a flourishing. After 70 years, more than 70 years, the Middle East will start to flourish and become a place that was thriving, and not, as we know, unfortunately, up to now, as death and wars.
From your mouth to God's ear. Gentlemen, we're out of time, unfortunately. I want to thank Senator Ted Cruz and Consul General Gilad Katz for the conversation. And thank you, viewers.
And we just forgot one thing, L'chaim. Before we finish, we have a L'chaim. This is something very important. So L'chaim to all of us, and please God, we will all be with our families, healthy, and many, many good years to all of us.
L'chaim to life.